Alright, see anybody else coming?
She was like, I'm not.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. So today we are very pleased to have Professor Vanessa Miller to come speak with us about her research. Vanessa is assistant professor at Indiana University Bloomington. She specializes in education law, K through 12 and higher education. She's an interdisciplinary scholar. She focuses on race in the law, school and university police, school crime, safety, prison education, and the role of courts in education law and policy. And she's particularly interested in the experiences of Latina students impacted by the school to prison nexus and the broader criminal legal system. Professor Miller earned her JD from Penn State Law and her PhD also from Penn State University, where she was awarded the Dr. Macy Clark Yappy Dissertation Memorial Award for having the highest quality dissertation relating to educational equity. Prior to joining the faculty at Indiana University, Professor Miller was the inaugural postdoctoral associate at the Race and Crime Center for Justice at the University of Florida, Levin College of Law, and she also practiced education law at a firm in California. Her recent work has appeared in the Missouri Law Review, Journal of Law and Education, Washington and Lee Journal of Civil Rights and Social Justice, Rutgers Law, Race and Law Review, and American Journal of Education. So without further ado, Professor Miller.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining me today. And thank you so much for hosting me today. I'm really excited to talk about my work, and also I'm looking forward to your comments and questions and how I can better my research. So as mentioned, my name is Vanessa Miller. I predominantly focus most of my work right now in school and university police. And one of the reasons I was so interested in school and university police is on a personal level, growing up in Miami, Florida, in predominantly Latino schools, I saw a lot of police at schools and never understood why are there constantly police at my school. When I went to the University of Florida for undergrad, I remember going to a football game. I'm a very big college football fan. So I remember going to a college football game and there were officers armed with AR-15s as I'm trying to get into a stadium with tanks. I'm sorry?
Go Gators.
Hey, thank you. All right. So I was wondering why do we have these officers outfitted in AR-15s when I'm just trying to watch a football game? And then I went to work at the education law firm. This was right during COVID, and there was a lot of disciplinary actions that we had to deal with in trying to assist school districts and how to properly enforce mask regulations, testing, and the school districts thought police sound like a very great idea to do this. So it was somewhat of a work in progress for me to build from a personal experience and then in a professional experience, and now focus predominantly on school and university police. So the work that I have today that's in progress, and I really mean a work in progress, comes from this line of research. So I'm working today on a newest project. It's called Surveil U. I was also thinking about Police State University, but Surveil U kind of sounds a little bit more catchy. And it predominantly talks about the use of artificial intelligence, big data, and predictive policing on campus. So this movement, we see a little bit more in the K through 12 section, how school resource officers and school police officers are using predictive algorithms to determine what students are at risk for failing, for dropping out, for not passing classes, possibly for truancy. And it's really concerning in the K through 12 level because these are children that we're talking about. So much so that Florida, where I'm from, they got in trouble for using predictive algorithms in trying to inform school districts on how to predict who is going to become a truant, who's going to be charged with truancy. And they weren't just going after students, they were going after parents, going to houses of parents saying, hey, it's very likely that your child is going to miss enough classes that we might be able to charge them with truancy. So we're going to now investigate you. And this was in a predominantly Latino area, and there's a lot of racial biases that are not only embedded in these predictive algorithms, but the means that it is affected then continues this racialized process of a state of surveillance. So my paper looks at these issues, but in a higher end level. So in universities and colleges, specifically public institutions. So what I do is I provide in this paper first an overview of expanded models of university policing. So what does university policing look like? How have their authority and abilities expanded over the last few years, and how is AI and big data incorporated in that? I've done a lot of work in university police generally, so this is just an extension of my work. Then I provide some clarification as to what I mean by artificial intelligence and big data in policing on campus. Then I discuss 4 specific areas of law where I think that the use and reliance of AI and big data in university policing is concerning. Those 4, and I'll talk a little bit more about them, is student privacy rights and FERPA. The second is student rights and the Fourth Amendment. Third is university employee speech and the First Amendment. And then lastly, the challenges and limits of university police given from their statutory authority. Then I provide a conclusion, which for those of you who write law reviews, for me, it's always the hardest part to write a conclusion, because I'm like, you just read everything I said, like I conclude. So that will likely be the last thing, all right? And while I understand that each one of these subsections, particularly in part 3 of the different areas of law, those are their own individual papers. That's what I hope to do from this, is kind of give an overview and nuance some of the issues that we see with AI and big data in predictive policing, and from there use each one of those as a paper of its own. I'm on the first year in the tenure track. I heard that's a pretty good way to get a lot of papers from one paper, so hopefully that's a good way for me to do so. So part 1, really looking at the brief overview of expanded models of university policing. Like I said, this is where I write a lot of my work, is on university policing and their authority. I have a forthcoming paper in May that I do a statutory analysis of every single state statute involving university police. And I code the data, I aggregated the data, and I saw how many states allow their officers or permit their officers to exist on campus. How many of them are required to be on campus? Are there any limitations? Can they be armed? Can they not be armed? So here I'm looking at how has the expansion of university police happened over time. So generally there's 3 eras of campus policing: the 1890s to 1950s, 1950s to 1980s, and 1980s to about 2010. And I argue that there's a 4th era of campus policing following 2010, and that's due to increased technology, increased reliance of technology, models of surveillance, the rise of social movements, including and especially the Black Lives Matter movement. So I know a lot of campus police scholars kind of stop in the 2010s and they're waiting to see where we are now. So I would argue there's other scholars that would agree there's like a 4th area of school police. And I argue this is where we see the rise of use of technology, AI, and big data. So because of this new wave of policing, I think that will be a way to enhance or justify the use of technology surveillance, like body-worn cameras, as a way to incorporate AI and big data. So basically university police saying, this isn't new. We already have video and camera and reliances that we have on surveillance technologies. Of course, we can use artificial intelligence and big data. So 2 examples I have. One from my home institution at IU, there was a Black grad student who was leaving one of the parking garages, I think like this for the gym, and they only had cash on them. But the parking attendant said, you have to have a card. You cannot use cash. How about you go, we'll write your student ID down and we'll just charge it to your Bursar account. Student said, yeah, great. University police were looking at license plate readers, found this student, saw that they didn't pay, went to their dorm room and arrested them for failing to pay a $3 parking fine. So with that, IU got in a lot of trouble for many reasons. The police chief even stepped down. because they had to admit that they're using automatic license plate readers as a way to do university policing. And their initial justification for using this was safety. We want to know who's coming in and out of our buildings. Is it someone that we don't know? Is it a visitor? Are they lost? It was kind of determined to be a public safety issue. I don't know about you, but I don't think a $3 parking garage ticket is a matter of public safety. And then the second is not my home institution, but my hometown, the University of Miami Police Department. They had police that were present at a protest. Some things got ugly, and a police officer was able to use their body-worn camera and use video analytics to figure out who was there and what their student ID number was, and they were called in for disciplinary actions from the dean. So we have two big examples of police departments who are universities who are using video analytics and artificial intelligence means to try to figure out how can we further discipline and surveil students and even arrest them. And similar to IU, University of Miami said, oh, we're just using these video analytics to try to figure out who shouldn't be on campus. And some of my other work also clarifies or looks at how this idea of othering is very racialized when we look on campus, who should and should not be here, particularly when you look at the history of campus police, which was started in Yale in the 1890s, that their whole purpose of having a Yale police department was to exclude out those in the community who were predominantly Black and working class. So this idea of othering who should and shouldn't be on campus as a matter of public safety is heavily embedded in racialized conceptions of who belongs and who doesn't. So that's the first part of the paper. Second part is really a clarification of what I mean by AI and big data. I want to say I am not an AI scholar, but I am a scholar of ed law, and I think that its use and reliance in education is where I find my scholarship to matter. So what I really mean by AI and big data, as adopted by university police, is the same way that it's adopted from municipal and state police. So looking at predictive algorithms and predictive analytics to try to find patterns of behavior that may or may not predict crime. So if you remember the example I said about K through 12 of the officers trying to figure out who's likely to skip school, who's likely to fail, those same analytics to understand behavior, but to determine crime. And this looks pretty innocuous when you look at it on a larger scale. It's key card swipes, how many times you go in and out of a building using your university key card, biometrics. I unfortunately or fortunately was the class of 2020 bar examiners that took the bar online using biometrics, where they were like looking at our eyes to see if we were cheating. We weren't. But also, and I just want to point out, if I had a sticky note on my laptop that gave me all of the answers, it just looks like I'm looking at my laptop. So I didn't cheat, but I'm saying it could have been very easy. And they think that us looking around was somehow going to determine something. So biometrics and taking exams, automated license plate readers, exam tracking software, and also how regularly you sign up for classes and then drop them. So looking at patterns of behavior of, are you going to do well this semester? Should we call you in for possibly disciplinary actions depending on how many times you add or drop a class? How many times in your Canvas module, we use Canvas. Do you all use Canvas here? You know how you can look to see who's opened a document, how long they've looked at it? How can we use that to determine whether or not you might pass this class? Now, once that's handed over to police, what they do might be a different story, what educators might do. And that's where I then go to the third part, which is the legal implications and considerations. The first being student privacy and FERPA. So what counts as a student record to be protected by FERPA, and do these patterns of behavior allow institutions to circumvent these protections, especially since there's a FERPA exception for records maintained by a law enforcement unit of the educational institution. So here's where we see a lot of, you might be wondering, how is it that a exam tracking software matter for police? If the police department at a university are the ones using that and tracking that information, it's held by a law enforcement agency at an educational institution. It's no longer held by educators. So once those data is then transferred over to police departments at universities, they maintain those records. That's the exemption for FERPA. So how often are universities not only just transferring or allowing these institutions to access that data, but are we going to see a wave of institutions just saying, here, University Police Department, you manage these records, you manage this big data because you can try to help us determine students that are at risk of engaging in crime. So that's FERPA. Second is student rights in the Fourth Amendment. This is probably not the weakest section I have, but the one that I'm working at the most. So whether seemingly public information, like you coming in and out of a parking garage, is protected under the Fourth Amendment, what does that look like at an aggregate scale to police officers? And then third is employee speech and First Amendment. So I wonder, do university police at public institutions, do they speak for the institution? So the same way we have academic freedom, they have qualified immunity. And I argue they don't exactly look the same, but they have very similar protections in theory when you're looking at whether their actions, their discretionary actions are protected against liabilities and risk. So if police speak for the institution, is that the same as saying that the institutions themselves are collecting this information? And if it is, how does that undercut this idea of FERPA, of it either being transferred to the university's police department? I think for that section, I'm trying to figure out the connection a little bit more, but really trying to understand at what point do university police speak for an institution insofar that the institution can be held liable for using some of this information. And then lastly, challenges and limits of university police authority. So as I mentioned, I have a paper forthcoming in which I did the whole statutory analysis of every single state. What does each state say about university police? What is their jurisdiction? Can they police on or off campus? Many campuses that are situated in cities have public roads that cross in between them. And a lot of states have said, yeah, that counts as a university because you can't cross from one building to another without going through the public road. So anything that's adjacent can be university police grounds, or I'm sorry, university grounds for police to police. And this is really troublesome when then we're thinking about, all right, if we can try to find ways to challenge or limit university police using or relying on artificial intelligence and big data as a way to surveil students, do statutes give us a way to try to limit that authority? But my research has shown that they have wide discretion, and in some states, state discretion to do what they would. They're like any other police officer in the state, and some university police departments have more authority and more jurisdiction than their municipal counterparts. So if anything, the statutes give them a way to incorporate and rely on some of these policing methods as a way to continue to surveil students. And so those are the four different FERPA, Fourth Amendment, employee speech, First Amendment, and then the challenges and limits of the university police authority through statutes. But through all of those and throughout the entire paper, it would be remiss of me to say that there's not a running theme of race and racism and how racial biases are embedded in policing, also embedded in the ways in which artificial intelligence and big data is collected, especially for policing. So it would be really difficult for me to not weave how race and racism is incredibly visible throughout that. And professors, there's two professors at my institution that showed, hey, don't worry about it. Policing biases are, yes, there's some racial biases, but artificial intelligence that police use for their policing methods and big data, they're no more racist. They're just as racist as humans. But some other faculty, I believe at Northwestern, have found that these programs, these predictive algorithms, have been able to find out how to be better racists. So how do they become better at their racialized biases over time? So there's serious issues that come into play when it comes to biases, not just race, but when it comes to religion, when it comes to sexual orientation and to gender. So how can all of those be weaved throughout? So I'll leave with that. That is a large scale project, which I know can be many papers. And that's where I'm kind of hoping that this one paper will be a general overview of the complications, the considerations and implications of university police relying on AI and big data. And then from there, really trying to piece out each one of those into separate papers. As an interdisciplinary scholar, I write both in peer review and law review. So I'm trying to figure out which ones are suited better for some research studies, ones for law reviews. So if you have any recommendations on how to better this paper or future papers, I would really appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you all so much.
Questions?
I know I covered everything. Yes.
You said you researched every state. Did
Yep.
you look at New Mexico?
I did. Do you want me to pull it up?
Sure, that'd be very helpful for us.
Yeah. I will say your geographic counterparts, Nevada, they're the only state that requires a review board, which is really interesting. All right, so you all have 2 statutes. And then you also have a case, State versus Dawson from 1999, that the courts basically say that university police have a right to exist on campus. They are discretionary, which means New Mexico's statutes say the Board of Regents of each educational institution may employ and assign duties of university police for the institution. So it's a discretionary statute. Florida is required. It says directed. So I was like, great, of course. You do have police power. So university police officers in New Mexico have the same police power as any of their municipal counterparts. And the court decision says university police officers have the powers of peace officers to enforce all applicable laws within the exterior boundaries of lands under the control of the Board of Regents employing them. So it's a limited jurisdiction. They have the powers of peace officers within the exterior boundaries, including public streets, highways, attached to the institution or immediately adjacent to a campus where students are educated. Now, what a campus where students are educated is, no mention of weapons, the governing bodies, the governing board of the institution, no training requirements, nothing about removal. Police are required to have a badge. They can make arrests for violations, ordinances. This is interesting. They can make arrests for ordinances and university regulations, but no arrest is valid unless they're wearing a distinctive badge and a distinctive uniform. So they have to. And then the main purpose is crime control, which means that the main purpose of the university police is for crime control. That was all in Mexico.
That's very interesting, because I've been doing some training for the Albuquerque Police Department. And interestingly, there have been some officers from the UNM Police Department at those training sessions. And a lot of these training sessions were first devoted to constitutional policing and informing officers about the limits of the use of force. But they were there with and they're carrying weapons.
Yep.
They have the license to carry weapons just like any other.
Yep.
What they call them, sworn. That's
Sworn.
the word that they use here in Mexico. They're a sworn officer.
Yep, they are sworn.
But I haven't really looked at that statute. I just saw them.
Yep.
Person there. And I was delighted to see that they're getting training. I had no idea that
What else?
It's a little bar.
I was gonna say, what a bar. So what's interesting is many statutes don't even talk about training, but the few that do talk about training of what it is to be a police officer at a university. Although they are just like any other police, they are police officers or sworn law enforcement officers. They have the right to carry weapons, to execute arrests and search warrants. But it is really interesting because I believe that institutions have created this fallacy that they're meter maids, but yet they have full scale weapons. But I'm also glad to hear they're getting training, because that's not very common for many states. At Indiana University, there's actually a training camp where you go through an undergraduate institute, like your education, you get a degree in like criminal justice or criminology, and then you become a police officer. But while they're on campus getting their degree, they are law enforcement officers. So they get some training, but I wonder if, at least in what you're talking about, there's an MOU or some kind of understanding with the city of Albuquerque to give them training.
That I don't know, but I would assume that there should be one. In
Should.
terms of cooperation between APD and
Mhm,
Alfred Police Department and the Atlanta Police Department.
mhm.
Because the APD would have jurisdiction over anything on campus as well.
Mhm.
So trying to figure out how to cooperate and not overlap too much.
Yeah,
It seems to be
yeah.
absolutely essential.
Yeah, and some states have MOUs to say, what is your relationship between local cities? And some universities basically say, once you hit campus, like, it is not your responsibility. And they carve out exceptions for serious crimes that they cannot otherwise handle themselves. But I saw a hand up here.
I was just gonna comment on
Oh.
that just real quick. The jurisdictional issues. I remember like 2 or 3 years ago, we had somebody break in the Hart wing. They smashed the window and came in, and it was a jurisdictional issue. And they're roaming the building, and there was a question: why didn't campus police race over? And then some weird tension between the city police and the campus. It was actually the city police had been on the chase of this guy, and he drove onto campus, and they kind of abandoned the chase. But campus police had, for some reason, they've been excluded from like radio communications of city police, so they weren't aware that this person had come on campus, which is why they didn't show up here at the law school because of some jurisdictional conflicts, and
Yeah.
it was a bit crazy that there's some intra-jurisdictional tension.
Oh, yes, and it's very clear because for some institutions, you'll see the city police kind of look down on the university police, like, haha, you couldn't get a real job and now you're ready. But they're all police. But with at least looking at AI and big data, there's questions about those MOUs that are in place between city police and university police. If university police, or I'm sorry, if city police start using AI and big data as a means to predict crime in the area, are they going to be transferred over to the university? Some municipal police are like, no, those are ours. You can handle the crime on campus. So it'll be interesting to see the dynamic there. Yeah. I mean,
So university policy talks about partnerships with various law enforcement agencies
Mhm.
in Albuquerque, and that includes, I think, the state police, APD, and the sheriff's department.
Mhm.
That partnership is kind of mysterious in the policy, and I'm wondering if you think there's overlap there between that and the resources available to these larger agencies and how that could be used on campus. Because we talked about the expansion of campus police outside of the direct university campus, but what about the inverse, which is APD being able to use its resources for police on campus, or state police using their resources to police on campus? The implications there.
Yeah, and I think that's the most present when you look at major cities like New York City, Chicago, DC. They do have MOUs with local universities, particularly with private institutions. And if you all are not following, Johns Hopkins is having a big battle over whether they can have private police, because in their jurisdiction, it says that they can police all of Baltimore. So yeah, which I don't know if you all know, it's a large area. But so some states, some state universities that are either embedded within within a city like that do have MOUs to say, we cannot handle certain crimes and we don't have the resources, the training, or the tools. So they create partnerships with local municipal departments, sheriff's office, state police officers to say, if we have this and it initiates on campus, we're going to basically give it to you all so that you can give us the resources, but it's still under our jurisdiction. There's just a partnership. And I think that's been helpful for some that are within cities. It's also been helpful for very rural institutions because they don't have access to some of the resources and tools that some other police departments have. And interestingly, Places like, I think University of Montana or Wyoming, I'm sorry, I'm mixing the two up, don't have certain resources for when it comes to crimes of sexual assault. So they have looked to LAPD, which is in another state, and asked, can you send us some of the resources and tools that you use, like testing kits, so that we can also have access to it. So there have been partnerships. The extent of how useful they are, I don't know. But I do know that they exist. Is that what you were?
So, yeah.
Okay.
Actually was interested in the data
Mhm.
and access to it.
Mhm.
So within the university and its various computer systems and databases,
Mhm.
Canvas is only one.
Mhm.
But there's the police department. What, the universities have policies about the access. I think it access to the data. Which they may use, and then there's the second question, comes to engage in AI, you've got to have people trained
Mhm.
to do that. These campus police departments, on the other side, have the person, they're hiring people
Mhm.
to actually just, once they access, how to get access to data within the university, and then the people are trained to do it.
Yeah, so for the access to data, if the police department at the institution itself collects it, I mean, they have access to that data. So if it's larger, and that's where I'm really curious about do police speak for the institution, right? Part of it. But when it comes to data that the institutions are collecting, some institutions have literally given it away to the police department and say, this could help us detect crime, like how many times a student is going to fail a class. So you take care of this, because then you can circumvent FERPA and say it was collected by a police department and not the institution. So that is one example I know of how they're accessing data. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure. And then the second, for the need to whether they have people trained in the use of AI, this is where some university police are looking to their local or sheriff's office to see if there's anyone who's skilled in the area. And if not, I've seen collaborations with computer science departments to say, you build me a predictive algorithmic measure for me to try to determine crime. And there are institutions that have contracts with their own police departments to create these different kinds of predictive algorithms. Whether they're trained in it and know whether it works is a different story. But that is concerning. Yes.
We had someone from campus police come to the law school last week and talk about safety, and she did talk about how its jurisdiction is beyond, in terms of adjacent to the campus, it's beyond right across the street. It's a little bit further than that. And we, like many other campuses around the country, have with on-campus dorms, but we also have one of the private corporation dorms that for us, it's down by the airport and it's university branded, so it's called Logo Village. And it's interesting because it doesn't sort of qualify for the first year, the undergraduate first years in terms of dormitory living, so it's more for people after their first year. And the campus police do have jurisdiction over that dorm, and I think there are benefits and certainly detriments for living there. And one of the issues is alcohol, because the alcohol is regulated on campus dorms, but not over there. And some people like that, and certainly it also creates a lot of problems. So I guess the campus police and I don't know if it's APB also that has to go down there.
Yeah, it's on campus though.
It's not on campus, it's by the airport.
Oh, by the airport,
it's privately owned, but it's university branded, like other schools have their university branded, privately owned apartment.
Well, looking back to the statute, it makes sense because it says anything owned by an educational institution. So even, or where students are educated.
Right.
So I can see them making that claim, but I can also see the institution saying, we're not gonna not assign campus police there in case someone gets hurt and says, well, you protected everyone but me because I'm in this res hall. But that's really interesting. And for bringing up alcohol, there's a police chief, at, I think Boston, Boston University, Boston College saying, we don't need predictive algorithms. I can tell you students have alcohol. Like, we don't need to know this. And yeah, big shocker. But that one of the issues is when we look at predictive policing generally, they're not very accurate. They're just basically growing maps of where we've already seen crime. So if we look at that at university police, most of what they deal with is alcohol infractions. So we don't need predictive algorithms to tell us there's going to be alcohol. So then you add that on top of a private corporation owned a residence hall. That is really interesting. I'm going to look into that because that does create a lot of jurisdictional issues. Thank you. Mhm.
I wonder if you have been imagining kinds of reforms, like I have a general sense from your presentation that you're concerned about, over policing,
Could you all please?
but I wonder whether or not you have a particular protective like statute or regulation in mind, or if you have in mind like certain student rights, like if my swiping is going to be reported by the institution, then I should, as a natural person, get access to that. That you're even reporting that. Those are the kinds of questions that
Yeah, thank you for that. There was a paper written several years ago that gave a model police statute. And I think many states actually ended up adopting parts of that. And because it was pre-2000s, pre-use of technology, that's not really incorporated in the way that we, the questions you're asking. So looking at statutes and whether that's probably I think it's probably the most realistic way to say that there might be some protective statute or regulation that we can look to and turn to and say, can we include student data rights to be included in this? That also goes somewhat against my idea that we shouldn't have the statutes because campus police should be abolished. We shouldn't have campus police on campus. So on the one hand, I'm like, do I want further regulation of campus officers? Should I continue to just look to the law that continues their presence on campus? So maybe, but I do like this idea of looking at student rights and where they sign these student handbooks to say, I will allow myself to be able to be surveilled so long as I can also have access to that. So I think that would be a really great counteraction to the surveillance that's happening on campus institutions. I haven't thought too much about it, but I think that would be a really great way. Yeah. And I'll also say with reforms, I think a lot of institutions say we're holding our police accountable in these 3 ways. And I don't really think it's an accountability measure. I think they're just a different iteration of reform, like just how do we reform the police? So just diversify the police. That doesn't really do what they think it does. We'll, give them less hours. But I think holding police accountable at the very minimum is probably the best way to do so. And that might be one of the ways to do so is having students say, we're going to hold accountable by having access to our own data. Like Nevada saying, if you're going to have a police department on campus, that's your statutory right. You can do so, but you have to have a review board, including students, faculty, and staff.
Thank you for this presentation. I'm sorry I came in late. It's really interesting and thought I was able to catch some of it. With the kind of collection and aggregation of big data, individual swiping of your key card, et cetera, turns into a valuable resource. We've got like a new commodity that's created, right? So are there any student groups that are making a claim of right to that information as their property and as a commodity?
No, not that I know of. That's a really great position. Yeah. I know there is with the biometrics with, okay, if you're going to record me taking a test, I want access to that, but not with key card swipes, how long they were in a gymnasium, things like that. I don't think that's a part of the movement, but I think that would be a really great way to position how students have the rights to have access to it too.
Privacy issues and there's also potential property issues.
There was a question in the back about the coordination between
Mhm.
campus police and other entities. And I know from being on this campus for a while that most of that coordination actually strangely happens with the state police.
Mhm.
Usually when there's big protest events on campus or dissent events on
Okay.
campus, it's the state police who are brought in.
Mhm.
And you talk quite a bit about big data and survey, the sharing of data with law enforcement.
Mhm.
But I'm wondering to what extent you're kind of tracking and looking at the gathering of data
Mhm.
by law enforcement at these kind of protest events and stuff, and then the sharing of it with these other law enforcement entities, right? Because I go to some of these events. I'm a big free speech person, and monitor and observe them. And there's a lot of data being collected at these events,
Mhm.
okay? And, I have concerns about the extent to which that data is being shared
Mhm.
to sort of generate profiles on people who are activists or
Mhm.
are speaking out, exercising their constitutional rights on campus with other law enforcement entities. Do you have a feel for that, or?
So because most of the relationships of data sharing I've seen are the institution and its own police department, I haven't looked too much into the data sharing between at the university level between local police and university police, because that's a big concern in K through 12. Like law enforcement then sharing the data with school districts. So that's a really big concern in K through 12. So I haven't looked as much in higher ed, but that's definitely a concern, given that usually municipal state police officers, they're the ones that have access to the resources to create video analytics and things that might be able to help institutions. And I think that if we look at institutions in particular, like what their MOU state between, if they have one, between the local police department and their institutional department, then we might be able to see how that data is actually being, like you said, not just shared, but how's it being collected. And I think that's a really big concern I should probably look a little bit more into. But you're right, because of how many times, like I mentioned at the University of Miami, they were able to use video analytics to pinpoint a student and then go find them in their dorm. So not only could you find the student, but you had to look up where they lived. That was the University of Miami Police Department, but trying to figure out how then our local police then tracking and collecting data. And I know one concern is for activists or students themselves who are posting on Instagram and TikTok. So they're giving that information out freely to say, I was there, I wasn't there, this is what happened, this is what I recorded, and police are tracking that. So.
Okay, I'm happy to go next. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about your entry into this field. I've long been studying, students mostly at the K through 12 level and their constitutional rights. And I really just focus on constitutional rights. I'm so excited about you entering because largely, well, for many reasons, but one is that I think for some time there was a lot of interest in the potential challenges, but honestly, the confluence of 9/11 and sort of decreasing interest in privacy, frankly, or protection for privacy and our willingness, at large to give up our privacy interests, along with, highly publicized and rare instances of school violence, whether it's at the K-12 or higher education level through social media and other means. I think all of those things have combined to make it really difficult to carve out a space here that will be influential, and I hope that won't be your experience, but I share that it has been mine to some extent. And then to just give you then the idea of like, what is your role going to be, as it sounds like you're a still activist, like some of us, a scholar activist, right?
I like that.
Putting this research together for a reason. So what is your goal? What are you hoping to achieve in the, in sort of the short term, but really the longer term of your career? And I also wanted to just make you aware, if you don't already know Andrew Ferguson's work.
American.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Because I suspect, to Alfred's question, and Alfred was our university counsel, and so your question about the extent to which, or how, I guess, the police receive all this information. I think Andrew may have some ideas as far as like what police, you know, they're private companies that are selling this data and selling ideas to police forces, and I suspect that's happening in university campuses as well. Like, and so, which is not widely known. But anyway, I'm
Yeah.
thrilled. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And again, I think because this idea of safety of like, oh, well, we need to continue to be safe, and also we need to comply with Clery, you know, like we have to comply with Clery Act, has given universities a kind of like free for all to police to say, you do what you have to do because we have to comply with Clery.
Mhm.
Although Clery never says it has to be a police department, it just has to be a, you know, a certified, I forgot what a CSA. So yes, I think there's a lot of ways in which the university has given so much leeway to institutions under this idea of safety. And for me, Stevie Wilson, if you all are unfamiliar, he is an incarcerated person in Pennsylvania. He is an abolitionist, and his words of safety versus security have changed the entire way that I approach my work. And he says that he is sitting in a prison with police officers, correctional officers, barbed wire, constant surveillance, and he's secure, but he's not safe. And I really take that framework and how we view police on campus. We hear about, like you mentioned, mass shootings, horrific crimes, but when we look at what actually happens on campus, that is such a small point of what happens. So this idea of universities saying, well, we need to keep ourselves safe, they're just saying we want to secure the institution and not actually give the safety needs that students need on campus and the surrounding community. So that's part of my scholasticist point of view, is to really reframe how police are approached, or how we institutions approach police. That it's not about a measure of security, it's about safety and the real safety needs. So in the short term, one of my main goals is to really let the public know about university police, because until I started really digging into the research about 3 years ago, I was so unaware of the amount of authority that they have on campus. Like I said, I saw, you know, folks with AR-15s, and I was like, all right, that's a weird choice of weapon for a police department, for a football game, but sure. But understanding how much influence and power they have on campus, that's a short-term goal for me to really bring awareness to that. And I think in part it's because institutions, like I said, kind of create this, you know, they're just officers on bikes, like making sure people are, you know, safe on campus, coming in and out of your dorms, they help you move in, but that's not really what they do. And then long-term is to find other real solutions to keeping students safe on campus, not secure, but safe on campus. What that looks like, I'll let you know in a few years after tenure and all of that, and once I get there. But there are some things that we can, you know, actually point to, things of access to food, access to employment, access to health insurance, or just access to health in general. You know, there's so many food insecure students on schools and campuses that they don't have homes that they can turn to for safety, mental health. And I think those are realistic goals we can turn to, as opposed to just a constant automatic reliance on police. So that's my short and long-term goals of trying to really make the institution a place of safety.
Sure, maybe.
I just have
Oh,
a
go.
follow-up question. I have a point that Ernesto and Miriam made, and that is 9/11 really did change the,
Yeah.
the report on 9/11 indicated that there were lots of dots of information that could have pinpointed the attack and could have been prevented. But there was no coordination, there was no sharing information, nobody was connecting the dots. I think that was a phrase that they used. So they're all of a sudden changed, where law enforcement agencies, the FBI, state police, local police started sharing a lot more information than they ever used to before. And I think that's a threat to our privacy. It's not really constitutional. I think it's sort of regulatory or legislative has to be. Because I think legislation basically required a lot of this sharing. And now maybe it has gone too far. Maybe now there has to be some regulations or legislation sort of restricting when this information can be shared and how it can be shared.
Mhm.
And like, and I'm not sure MOUs, memorandum of understanding is the right way, because they may have separate interests that may not
Yep.
include privacy interests when you're doing it. But anyway, I think it's an interesting issue in terms of whether we've gone too far
Mhm.
in terms of sharing information.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially those MOUs that do exist with sharing. When I look at big data, it's aggregate data that helps us describe patterns. At what point does that aggregation stop? And I think some of those MOUs are intentionally vague so that you can continue to share and say, oh, it wasn't just for this time period or for this instance, but it's a institutional pattern on how students behave. And I think that's where it also starts to get a little bit on the far edge, as you're alluding to. But also, do you all know about the University of Idaho murders? So there were so many folks in this person's life that were like, this person needs help, and they were not connecting the dots, like you're mentioning. And now Idaho is one of the states that doesn't have a university police statute, but because of this, now the institutions and lobbyists are saying we should have a university police statute because we want to have the legitimacy of police on campus. And from that, they're trying to create MOUs with local police departments to say, we could have prevented this. There was this huge incident that happened, and now we need more police. But they already had police and just wasn't prevented. So now, like, this dramatization of some of these big instances, and now saying we have to share this information more. And you're right, it is a concern. Sorry, you have
Yeah, so, thank you. This is really interesting. It raises a lot of concerns in a lot of areas. But my question goes to this idea of predictive policing, because I wonder to what extent it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you go out and say, well, you know, police show up at your house and say, or your dorm and say, you're predicted to fail, you know, is that gonna, at what point does the intervention create, and the lack of privacy actually create the failure? So I'm really heartened that you're talking about addressing basic needs as a way to, you know, some of the tools to prevent that, because it seems like that might be a better intervention if somebody's predicted to fail rather than sending in the police. But I don't know enough about the science. It just raised that question for me.
Yeah, thank you. If there is a way to, instead of surveilling and disciplining and arresting students, to say, what are the things that you need, not what are the things that you might do, like basic needs, I would be all on board for that. But that doesn't exist. And I think there's so many racialized components to this idea of othering. Like, how do we continue to other folks in schools and campuses? And one way is through this idea of surveillance. And you're right, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, especially when the data we put into it already has, here's where crimes have been committed. And then you see that over and over again. You're like, all right, well, we're going to predict crime's going to happen here. So you did not do that. So yeah, there are way better interventions. And I just don't think the reliance on police is it.
So we just got a grant actually from the Mexico Higher Education Department to
Congrats.
do exactly that. Go and ask people what they need and try to address basic needs. So we'll keep you posted.
Yes, please. Yeah, that would be fantastic. And it's not to say let's predict who's going to become food insecure, but like who needs it in what areas and how can we prevent that from happening? So I think that is a really great way to stop the reliance on surveillance and policing as opposed to just meeting people where they need to be. So congratulations. Yeah.
I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm teaching a class of undergrad, so race and police reform this semester.
Race and what? I'm sorry?
Race and police reform.
Oh,
And
sorry.
I asked them, had they ever filed a police complaint? And if so, what department? There's only one student from this campus.
Did students know like university police was a way they can file?
And well, and apparently because that was the other reason.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I think there's a study that was done on how likely people are to report to police generally. And I'd love to know what that looks like at a university police, because this idea, some folks being like, oh, they just give you tickets, but that's really interesting. As in a super aside, I'm proposing a class on race, crime, and education. And I'm really interested on undergrads too. And some undergrads were like, oh, I didn't even think about that together. Like that wasn't even something that, you know, that we would think about putting in a class. So I'm really interested to see how that's unfolded.
Along those lines, I hope everybody will forgive me for this like slight PSA, but my colleagues know I'm directing the Marshall Brennan Project this year. So we have students that are teaching high school students about their constitutional rights and responsibilities. And we have colleagues in the College of Education who think their students who are going to be teachers, they've largely been born in the post 9/11 era and have very different views of, like you were saying, you know, it's perfectly fine and comfortable and acceptable and expected for them to refer any disciplinary matters to whoever's tasked with security at the school. And so, so anyway, these professors are concerned with their students' knowledge of the Fourth Amendment as well. So now my students, some of them are going to be training those students about the Fourth Amendment for the end of the semester. And then another pair are going to be teaching the teachers at the school where they're teaching in Belen, which is just up the road, about the Fourth Amendment, because they also don't have any idea that, you know, what protection students do actually enjoy on the K-12 campus.
Yeah, I love being in a school of ed because I can say teachers teaching how to teach or like teaching teachers how to teach. But I also do think, although this is suited for a law review, some of my other work really is trying to explain to educational leaders, these are the legal issues that you might see come up and how do you help students understand their rights and not just say whatever they want because the school resource officer is there. And it's a really important way to help students grab hold of their own rights because they're in an era where they just turn on TikTok and tell people their deepest, darkest secrets. So, yes. So, and I just came from the University of Florida where TikTok was banned. If you did not know that, yeah, it was banned from campus. And one of the main reasons, folks have said is, oh, we don't want this information being shared to China and other governments, but it was reframed to say, we don't want students to use University of Florida Wi-Fi because then police have access to all the things that they put on TikTok, as though they don't have access to that already. But it was reframed to say, don't post this using University of Florida Wi-Fi because everything that you spew out is going to be accessible to the institution. So I think it was a good and bad way to frame that. So, all right. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but thank you all so much. I'm really I'll be here for a few more minutes.